Hi guys, my name is Borodante, and today I'd like to tell you about the new art style and brushwork I'm currently developing to approach the massive project of Outlandish Curiosity. This is an 88 pages long art book about the adventures of Gilbert Rufflestum through the unseen fantasy island with rich flora and fauna. The project is directed by the author of the story, Kevin Folk. We started our collaboration 4 years ago. During this time, Outlandish Curiosity doubled in size and transitioned from simple encyclopedia-style illustrations to full-size paintings covering each page. Needless to say, I wasn't prepared for this amount of work, so the passion project ended up being postponed and delayed countless times. But this time, I feel fresh, rested, and really close to finishing the book. I decided to adapt and improve my painting approach to become able in handling this amount of work. So yeah, we're back to this. I actually did quite a lot of progress on the book since the last episode, so Kevin and I went through all the remaining pages to the very end, defining all the final colors and like the first quick draft of detail, I guess. So now what's left is about... Okay, that's 36 pages that already have final colors, and now we just need to add final detail. That's a lot of work, so I'm going to have to do a lot of it in the episodes. Pretty much planning to continue working on the book in Corel Painter. I developed several cool brushes to work with all this, and to make sure they fit the older style that I had with my brushes in Art Studio Pro. They pretty much look the same with the texture and stuff like that, but do have a lot more cool functionality that I'm gonna tell you about in a moment. Quick reminder to you guys, if you want to get Corel Painter 2021 with a $100 discount, go through the link in the description and use this code. Alright, now let me tell you about the brushes. I figured out how to import my own shapes by capturing them from the document, by using this command right here, capture dab. It wasn't super obvious. I thought I would be able to find it myself, but I actually had to look it up. And as you can see, I set up a very interesting way it reacts to tilting. There's a very precise way of setting up the width and the height of the brush depending on the tilt. And also you can precisely define when exactly the angle starts changing the shape. So in my case, I can use the brush at a lot of different angles and it will stay round. Then in a very small range of angles, it immediately becomes super squished. So I just use this convenient, pretty small range of angles right here that you can actually use without having to go choreographic with your hand or something. That's something that you might be really happy about when you're setting up the brush, but then when you start working, you pretty much always use the same kind of semi-squished shape because it's just too much to tilt it through the whole range. But this way, I can easily like, oh, I need to make like a rounder, normal spot, so I'll just tilt it a bit vertically and I'll make that spot like this, you know? And when I want to just cover a big surface, I will tilt the pen a little bit and it starts doing that. So that's the way I set up the shape. You can take a look at the settings I used right here. So this is a captured type of brush, and I'm using this hard media panel to set up reaction to the tilt. This is the beginning of the tilt and the end of the tilt, 25 degrees to 45, and that's it. That's a very small range. But another thing that's actually important for today's video is this setting for the blending I pretty much always use. So when you press harder, you get just the flat color of the brush. When you press slightly, it becomes a bit semi-transparent, but also it starts blending colors. And simply by changing this resaturation value, making it lower, I can make this brush incredibly wet and blend colors a lot. And this is a setting that I change quite frequently, like sometimes when I want to just introduce new details and go very sharp and specific with my new details, I sort of like tone down the blending and start just adding colors, you know? It's a lot easier to add colors without blending it with anything. But when I just want to go ahead and make very moist details, that's a great way to do it. For gradients, and all that. So that brings us to our main story of this episode, gradients for detailing. I had quite a blast in the very beginning of this video. That was the process I captured yesterday, and this is pretty much the progress of it from this to this. I was just going all over the place, detailing stuff so they would look presentable, while working as a finalized artwork. Even if it's not super detailed here and there, it should still look acceptable for a final product. Those are very different things, having something detailed or having something just looking finished. Finished and detailed are different things. So let's say, like this frog, or maybe like one of these frogs jumping in the distance. This frog is detailed. But then we can move on and look at these leaves. These leaves are finished, but they are not detailed. Their level of detail is on the level of pretty much a lot of other stuff in the initial stage that I started working with. So this is about the same level of detail, but it's not a finished look. Then I turned it into this, and it became finished, even though not super detailed. And I think I found a really cool thing. I keep talking about using gradients to achieve more of a rich look and generally more of a fortunate rendering of your image. You can always find a place for a gradient. Nothing has to be flat anywhere ever on a painting. And I have yet to find an exclusion for that rule. Literally every time I try it, it always looks better with a gradient than without it. Now, it doesn't mean that it should be a very strong gradient. It may be very subtle, and that's the main thing you should decide on, how high of a contrast the gradient has for literally everything, from the dark side of this frog to the bright side, from the dark side of this leaf to the bright side of this leaf. You see, this is a much more subtle gradient, but it's still there. Also gradients right here, and pretty much in this painting I noticed I can always get away with just introducing gradients to those very unfinished details that I already have, without the actual need to introduce new details. So I'm not really improving level of details in many cases. Of course, quite a lot of the times I do, especially with the frogs, because they're the main thing on this page, they need to be defined. But overall, you can see initially these frogs had about the same level of detail. And I just took care of the gradients, instead of these flat brush strokes on the leg that introduced all of the colors and all of the information about where the light is, where the dark side is, but they look very unfinished. I just blend them together, and that's it. So, my theory is that I will be testing a lot in this episode. What about just whenever you're searching for details by painting around the actual colors, you just always introduce a gradient. I think that way, even when you're searching, when you're still uncertain with what the final details should look like, you can still stop at any point and you will get something that looks finished. Not detailed, but finished. And of course, in paintings, absolutely not everything needs to be detailed. Only the most important things need to be detailed, and the stuff that is not important, but just should be there, it could be stylized and simplified into these, you see right here, this is a gradient, this is another gradient, and so on and so forth. And I truly believe that if I would introduce more gradients back then, because this is actually an old detail as you can see, if I would introduce even more of those gradients, it would work as such a good, fortunate stylization that would be looking really well without having to detail it around too much. So that's where the brushes are coming into play. I know a lot of really good artists keep saying that you shouldn't rely on blending in your artwork. And I agree with them, but there are different art styles, and there are different strategies in achieving certain things. Of course, you shouldn't rely on blending in terms of creating shapes and their surfaces. It's more about creating defined and loose edges all over the place. So pretty much you should never create details that have defined edges on all the sides. You always should lose one of the sides. I did this a lot with all of these leaves right here. Like this kind of stuff, whenever I introduced some kind of highlight, I added a bright spot, like say right here, but then I blend it away. And that's it. That's all I do. Just repeat that forever and you're good to go. You will have to make a lot less decisions and a lot less abundant, redundant details that no one needs, yet still get a really good, satisfying image with a limited level of detail. Everybody wins. So yeah, that's what I had to say for today. As I mentioned, I worked on this page yesterday. I'm gonna work on it today as well. And also today I will try to move on to the next 3 pages. They are the pages of the same series. We did the initial coloring of those pages before, and now I will be detailing them. So as I was working for the next couple of days, I found myself thinking about how awesome the whole gradient approach is. It's a very clever brain loophole and a very effective tool to transition between stylized and detailed visuals. You see, our brains are used to seeing gradients as a proof of good visual contact with an object. If we can see the gradient from light to shadow, that means there's no aerial perspective or lack of lighting, and we get to witness geometry with no interference. And also, gradients are a very effective tool to transition between stylized and detailed visuals. The less definition you want to apply on a certain object, the simpler its gradient should be, down to as simple as one linear gradient defining general color and lighting direction. And don't forget to lose some of those edges on the object silhouette to make it blend into the environment. I also made a cool discovery about working with flat brushes. So I showed you how I set up my brush to have it change its shape depending on the tilt angle. But what I changed afterwards was the angle of that shape. You see, I've always used tilting brushes more like a glorified pencil. The shape stretches along the direction of the pen. While with actual flat bristle brushes, you can't tilt it like that. Real flat brush is always perpendicular to the direction of its handle. I always thought of this as a limitation of traditional tools, but during this long session I decided to give it a try, just because my hand started really cramping after hours of precise gradients on all kinds of cylindrical shapes. And guess what? It's actually way more comfortable. Hard to explain, you just have to try it to feel the difference, but the point is, when the brush shape is perpendicular, you end up using it at much more convenient angles for your hand. So much better. So yeah, as I mentioned, the process took a long time. You're actually looking at a super sped up time-lapse of a 9-hour session. Though I did have to cut out a lot of footage of me setting up brushes. Nadia keeps telling me I should stream myself setting up brushes, since I literally do this for hours with no break. That would be a cool kind of silent lo-fi music for painting kind of stream, almost art of itself. Anyway, I ended up finishing the first 2 pages and doing about 75% of work on the other 2. The first page with toads still has me searching for the patterns on the toads' backs, so that will change in the final book for sure. Aside from that, feeling very confident about the process, the gradient approach lets me maintain a cool style of brushwork without having to think too hard, which is a huge save, since with a giant workload like this, it's too easy to become dumb and start outlining details, making everything look like a child's drawing. So this is it. Hope you enjoyed this light-speed time-lapse and my thoughts on gradients, brushes, and details. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!